Unfortunately for all of us and our anxiety issues, it is election season again here in the United States. And just like most election cycles, there have been some recent, unexpected twists and turns. And those events got me thinking of Victoria Woodhull, the first woman to run for president in the United States back in 1872. 48 years before women even had the right to vote in the United States. Despite being an absolute trailblazer for her time, her name is often left out of history books. So let's take some time to get to know Victoria Woodhull. Hi, I'm Katy, and I'm one half of Queens Podcast, a show where we take really deep dives into the lives of women from history. In this episode today, I'm going to kind of skim over the life of Victoria Woodhull, but if you would like a really deep dive into this deeply interesting woman, I will link to those episodes in the show notes. Check it out. And without further ado, let's discuss Victoria Woodhull. Vicky was born poor, like dirt poor, to a con artist father named Buck and his illiterate wife, Roxy. She was the 7th of 10 children, and she was born in 1838 in Ohio. Her dad, Buck, was literally a snake oil salesman, like absolute con artist. And he saw a way to use his young daughter to capitalize on the spiritualist movement that was going on in the United States at the time. This was Civil War era. So just about everybody in the country had lost somebody. So there's a lot of lonely, desperate people that never felt like they got that closure, who thought, oh, if I could just speak to my loved ones who have passed away one more time, that would just really help me to move on. So this was a time in the rise of popularity with seances and mediums and Ouija boards, all that spooky stuff. Dad makes Vicky and her younger sister, Tennessee, basically child celebrities by telling them and everybody else that they were mediums and they could talk to the dead. And Buck made so much money exploiting his children and those desperate to communicate with the other side. Side note, he was probably inspired by the Fox sisters, who I won't have time to go into in this video. But if you would like to learn more about children talking to the dead, look up the Fox sisters. They were certainly the most famous case. The more you know. So Victoria was on the road with this gig starting when she was like 8 years old. And she was supporting the entire family. And there were absolutely no child labor laws at the time. I don't think there were any labor laws at the time. So Vicky is working these long days. They were making a killing, except Dad was spending that money as soon as it hit the bank account. They probably didn't have a bank account. What I'm getting at is that this man was wasting Victoria's money that she was working to earn, and she was seeing none of that. He was barely feeding Victoria. She is totally malnourished, she is overworked, and she is just worn out. Unsurprisingly, Vicky was like, fuck that. Oh yeah, we curse a lot on this history channel. Vicky was like, absolutely not, fuck that, I am done with this. I am marrying the first man of means that I can find. Because at the time, as a woman, marriage was kind of your only escape from abusive parents. So when she was like 14 or 15, she marries a man named Channing Woodhull, a man who she thinks is a doctor. Funny story about medical school back then. Have you ever seen that meme that's like, being an old-timey doctor must have been crazy. You got ghost in your blood. Let's do cocaine about it. Yeah, that's kind of what it was like. Like, you could attend a weekend retreat and bada bing, bada boom, you are now a medical doctor. Which appears to be what Channing Woodhull had done. Channing may not have been a credible physician, but he was really good at one thing: drinking booze and wasting money. And neglecting his child bride. Super good at neglecting his child bride. He was a raging alcoholic who would just disappear for days, leaving Victoria and their 2 young children zero money or any means to feed themselves. They are living in absolute poverty, so she decides to get a job as a stage actress. Now, we're not talking Broadway. This would have been more like in like a cabaret or a tavern or something. And back then, most stage actresses did supplement their income by working as sex workers. Zero judgment here. A girl's gotta do what a girl's gotta do. She's like, there's gotta be a better way. And as a result, she starts to form some pretty radical views for the time on marriage and divorce. And then she meets a guy. His name is Colonel James Harvey Blood, aka Colonel Blood, which I think is just a badass name. So they meet at a spiritualist meeting, and the spirits tell them they should be together, and they are like, hey, who are we to argue? Vicky divorces her first husband. Colonel Blood and Vicky grab her 2 kids, grab her sister Tennessee, and they head to New York. At this point in her life, Victoria starts to dig in deeper and deeper into her radical ideas about marriage, and that evolves into her ideas on feminism. And her new man, Colonel Blood, is so supportive. She's like, women should be able to vote. And he's like, say it louder, Vicky. I just really like Colonel Blood. He's a veteran, abolitionist, feminist, wife guy. He's the ally we need. However, just being a feminist in New York isn't exactly going to pay the bills. So Vicky and her sister Tennessee get back into their old job. They start acting as a medium, and they get one really advantageous client. They get hired by a guy named Cornelius Vanderbilt. Maybe you've heard of him. Her sister Tennessee actually becomes Vanderbilt's mistress for a little bit. If you don't know who Cornelius Vanderbilt is, we don't have enough time to really dive into why he's so important, but the cliff notes are, he's a really, really rich dude and a big mover and shaker in pretty much all industries that are making money at this time in America. He's kind of a big deal. And Victoria, with her mind on her money and her money on her mind, starts asking Vanderbilt, can you teach me about the stock market? And so she starts to learn everything that she can, and he's like, hey, you're pretty smart. You ladies should open your own brokerage firm on Wall Street. And so they did. Yes. The first woman to ever run for president in the United States is also the first female stockbroker on Wall Street. And they made a killing. They made so much money. So they decide to ride that momentum, continue their influence, and they started a newspaper. That was the Woodhull and Claflin Weekly. And they were actually the first publication in the United States to publish Karl Marx's The Communist Manifesto in English. So our girl is starting to get some clout. She's like, now that I've made a name for myself, now that I have a platform, I need to start working on these feminist issues that I actually care about. So in January 1871, when Victoria was only 32 years old, she addressed a congressional committee, being one of the first women to ever do so. I kept getting mixed reports on if she was the first woman to ever do so, or if Elizabeth Cady Stanton was the first one to ever do so. Either way, it doesn't matter. She gets to speak in person in front of a congressional committee and have a uterus all at the same time. And that was this whole thing. It was a big deal, as many famous historians have said. Victoria argues that actually women already have the right to vote under the 14th and 15th Amendments to the Constitution. In case you're not aware, the 14th and 15th Amendments granted the right to vote to former enslaved people. So depending on how you interpret the text, it could definitely be argued that it says that all of us got the right to vote. Even though this didn't make any actionable change in policy, she did catch the eye of famous American suffragette Susan B. Anthony. And Susie was like, we love what you're doing. We love your momentum. You need to join our movement. You are charismatic. You are well connected. We want you to be the face of the suffragettes. Until that collab came to a screeching halt. It turned out Victoria was way too radical for the mainstream feminists, basically due to her beliefs in divorce. They were like, oh, whoa. It is still the 1870s. We are trying to take baby steps. You are trying to take leaps and bounds. This isn't gonna work. You see, Victoria supported a movement called free love. The general principle around the free love movement was that if a woman is not in love with her husband anymore, she can just leave him. If they want to live together without even being married, okay. If they want to have an open marriage, why is that any of y'all's business? Clearly, she is pulling from personal experience. she may as well have been saying, hey, if you're like 14 or 15 and you marry the first guy you see to escape a shitty experience and then end up in an even shittier experience, legally, you should be able to just leave and it not be a big deal. She said that much more eloquently than I myself would say it. She says, I have a natural right to love whom I may, to love as long or short a period as I can, and to change that love every day if I please. And yeah, when Susan B. Anthony and her friends learned about Victoria's views, they were like, oh, this is a hard stop. You can't sit with us. And honestly, that's why people like Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton are in the history books, and Victoria Woodhull is often left out because the suffragette movement tried really hard to erase her from their records altogether and distance themselves. Basically, they were like, she doesn't even go here. And so it was like she never did. And so finally, Vicky was like, fuck that. I don't need them. The only way I'm ever gonna actually make real change is from the top. I'm running for president, y'all. But yeah, like I said, this is the 1870s. The 19th Amendment granting women the right to vote is not passed until 1920. Also, she was only 34 and you have to be 35 to be elected president. Though, loophole, she would have been 35 by the time that she would have been sworn in. I'm not actually even 100% sure what the rule is there. Anyway, fuck it. I'm running. Let's do it. Even though she wasn't taken seriously as a candidate, the press loved to hate her. And she was given the nickname Madam Satan. This image right here is a really popular political cartoon that floated around at the time. This is Victoria Woodhull. Let's examine it a little bit closer. Here Victoria is with her Satan horns, holding a sign that says free love, as she actively tries to persuade someone to come to her side. Now let's zoom in on the other character in this picture. This poor woman walking uphill. The first thing you'll notice is that she has a drunken man on her back. We have to assume this is her husband who is doing nothing to lighten her load. You'll also notice she's carrying 2 small children. So the husband could be carrying one of those children, but instead she is carrying all 3. I'm just realizing I actually don't know if the public knew much about Victoria's first marriage. Because if they did, this is really personal, actually. This is really rude because she had 2 children with her drunk husband. Super rude. But yeah, basically the heavily burdened woman is supposed to represent just the everyday woman in the United States. And Victoria is showing her there is another way. You've got options, girl. It's interesting to me that Victoria is the bad guy in this cartoon. But history is horrible. So here we are. One thing that I don't love about Vicky's otherwise pretty cool presidential campaign is that she named Frederick Douglass as her running mate, to which I imagine Frederick Douglass said, who the fuck is Victoria Woodhull? They did not know each other. So I don't love her using the name and image of a former enslaved person who was really making strides for her own personal gain without his permission. Anyway, let's move on. New character alert. Prepare to hate him. This is Anthony Comstock. I'm not even kidding when I say this is my least favorite person in history. I detest this man so much. What you need to know is that he was a weirdo with way too much power who wanted to end smut in America. In doing so, he actually set science and reproductive rights back like a whole generation. Ugh, I hate this guy so much. Anyway, Comstock decides that Victoria and everybody associated with her are just smutty McSmutface, and he takes them to court, and he has Victoria arrested over and over and over. All that money that Victoria had earned was now just being slowly depleted through all of these court cases just to get this fucking guy off her back. In fact, she was even in jail on the day of the 1872 election. She was planning to go and try to vote, and when they said, no, uterus, ooh, don't you got some laundry to do, little miss? She was then going to start a protest, but she couldn't do that because she was in jail. So Victoria Woodhull didn't win the election, which is no surprise. But to add insult to injury, she is now broke. She's gone rags to riches to rags. And sadly, her marriage to this lovely man, Colonel Blood, doesn't survive the stress of it all, and their relationship deteriorates. And so now she's getting another divorce. Now, let's pivot. Remember Cornelius Vanderbilt? Well, he's passed away, and his children are now fighting over inheritance. It's messy, it's tacky, rich people. Now, remember, Vicky's sister Tennessee used to be Vanderbilt's mistress. And so she starts sniffing around and is like, the Commodore actually promised me a little chunk of change when he died. So basically the Vanderbilt children were like, oh my God, if we just give you a large sum of money, will you just go the fuck away? You have to go overseas. And they were broke. And sure, Victoria and Tennessee, they take that money, they get the fuck out of there, they head to England. Once in England, Victoria finds work as a public speaker. It seems like her ideas are maybe not accepted by polite society, but people are a little bit more interested in them. She meets a man, a wealthy man, a banker from a very good family named John Martin. And they fall in love, and very much against his family's wishes, they get married. And then after John dies, Victoria is left a very wealthy widow. Rags, riches, rags, riches, bitches. She spent the rest of her life in England, spending time with her sister Tennessee and her daughter, and driving cars. She got really into cars. And that is the life of Victoria Woodhull. This woman lived so many lives in one life. Now, I will say that she was not a perfect person, and there are parts of this story that I'm skimming over. Not perfect, never boring. I really do have a soft spot in my heart for Victoria Woodhull. So I hope you can all raise a glass to Victoria Woodhull, and I hope you enjoyed this story. If you did, make sure to subscribe, like, comment, all the good stuff. And make sure to check us out over on Queens Podcast. Cheers, bitches.